On the other side, we've got Tyler playing what looks like a black-green mid-range or black-green aggro deck. He's got Geralf's Messenger, but it's not, it doesn't have a zombie themed deck. It's just Geralf's Messenger because, hey, it's like the reverse kitchen thing. So
yeah, we've actually, so the black-green deck here, actually we've seen a fair amount of play with. We saw this just a little bit before the Star City Open in Dallas. It's making a top 8. The idea is that the deck is the rock deck here, which Tyler's playing, is very good right now against aggro decks. It has the interaction of Desecration Demon and Disciple of Bolas.
Yeah. We'll get those on screen for you when they're actually on the table. We'll talk a little bit more about those. But you see Frank there on the left just led with a Hallowed Fountain. Tyler on the play has a Sign in Blood on turn 2.
I think what Tyler's deck really gets to do is it gets to be like a Rights deck, which has a really good matchup against aggro because he has access to 4 Mutilate. I mean, his removal suite's amazing. It has 1 Putrefy, 4 Mutilate, 3 Abrupt Decay, 3 Tragic Slip, 2 Victim of Night, Liliana's. He has so many ways to kill creatures, and he's able to try to go late with control decks because of cards like Sign in Blood and Disciple of Bolas.
So he's going to have a little bit of trouble dealing with some of the creatures Frank's going to put on the table, but given that he's a hexproof deck. But the Fencing Ace sitting right there, that one's not hexproof. And we've got a Geralf's Messenger from Tyler. Passes back to Frank.
Right. So I think a turn 2 Fencing Ace out of Frank is fairly good from Tyler's side of the board. That's not one of the scarier cards that he can play because you can kill it with removal spells, and Tyler has no shortage of those in this matchup.
See a Rancor on the Fencing Ace from Frank, and swing.
Yeah, this is a pretty good opening for Frank because normally you wouldn't want to enchant Fencing Ace in this matchup with a you wouldn't want to put Rancor when your opponent has untapped mana. Tyler just has so many kill spells. But the fact
tapped out.
The fact he was tapped out and that Frank was able to, really get 6 damage off that Rancor is pretty good here. He's going to force Tyler to right now deal with the Rancor, and then Frank will still be able to get it back. So the kill spell will only 1-for-1 him.
So Tyler untaps, plays a 4th land. Looks like we've got a Desecration Demon. So let's put that one on screen for everybody. This is the latest in a series of 6/6 black flyers for 4. Abyssal Persecutor School of Demon, I guess. So there's the 6/6 flyer for 4. At the beginning of each combat, any opponent may sacrifice a creature. And looks like our match switched by accident. We'll get that right back to you. Anyway, yeah, you can see it causes, at the beginning of each combat, any opponent may sacrifice a creature, and if a player does, tap Desecration Demon and put a +1/+1 counter on it. So you can control the demon if you want, but it's at the cost of a creature, and that's really good against these hexproof decks that otherwise, the hexproof guys that are otherwise going to trump removal.
Well, where Desecration Demon really shines right now is the fact that it's a good answer to Thragtusk. On top of that, it's a pretty decent card for sacrificing to Disciple of Bolas.
So we see a Spectral Flight on the Invisible Stalker that Frank Skarren played last turn, and both of his guys getting in, and Tyler is going to fall.
Well, Tyler takes us, he's going to go down to 3, which I don't think, unless he has that Mutilate in play, I don't think he can really do. To me, that would be a tell that he does have it. Tyler's let his life total get very low in this game by he's opting to play creatures instead of holding up kill spells. He does have a Thragtusk in hand right now, but doesn't really have the opportunity to play it. I'm a little surprised that he opted not to trade Desecration Demon with Fencing Ace. To me, at least, that he must be. What that means is he has some other way in mind of dealing with this.
Yeah, he's staring at that Thragtusk, but can't quite see what else he's got in his hand.
Well, he has to be worried about not making that trade because he can't really. That was the only turn where he could for sure make that trade. Frank has the option next turn to play a creature, tap Demon, and then swing with Fencing Ace.
Right.
I mean, on top of that, Tyler needs to answer this 3/3 hexproof unblockable. So, and in his deck, the only way to do that is Mutilate.
So he decides he is not going to play the Thragtusk.
Yeah.
Passes back, no attacks.
He does have 3 Abrupt Decay and a Golgari Charm, and I think he's going to try to do that to one of these auras to survive here.
Frank untaps and now is pondering his options.
All right, Tyler in a pretty rough spot. He's going to have to answer everything that Frank does. Remember that 6/6 does not actually get to block if Frank doesn't want it to.
Right. It's one of those things, like, you can deal with it if you're willing to trade a creature for a combat phase that or at least to deal with a demon during one combat.
If Frank, you have to be wondering whether or not Tyler has double kill spell.
So he's just going to go ahead.
He has no answer to it.
Oh wow! So Tyler decides to just
yeah, interesting enough. Tyler
kind of bluff something there.
Well, Tyler had a Thrag Tusk in his hand and chose not to play it.
Right.
So
it was.
Yeah, it looked like he was attempting a bluff there, but it didn't really.
Right.
It's a strange bluff because you have to think that the odds that Frank isn't going to attack with that 1/1 is really low.
Right. It's unblockable, untargetable, and it's going to kill you. So I mean, unless.
Well, I have to think, why would Frank? The thing is, there's no reason for Frank to leave it back to block. I think that's the bigger point.
That too.
So because it's not going to be left back to block, it's going to attack. I mean, while you need to make a line, yeah.
Yeah, and Frank was at a pretty healthy life total there as that game ended, so there was no reason for him to leave it back to block either. Strange little play there. I would have liked to have seen what else was in Tyler's hand. We did see the Thrag Tusk that he decided not to play, but considering the amount of removal,
Well, he also had a
have
Victim
access.
of Night in hand.
Okay, I didn't see that. So that's he had some removal. Obviously, no good against the Invisible Stalker, but he had an answer to the Fencing Ace.
So the way that Tyler, I think, needs to look at the matchup is that when you're a removal spell deck against banned hexproof, you want to be thinking like you're the defender. So you want to think, okay, there's these cards that Frank can cast, and you either, for every creature, you need to either have a removal spell for it, or you need to have a creature that stops it from attacking. And in this situation, Tyler had kill spells, but he chose to make creatures instead. Mm-hmm. So, for example, like making a turn 3 Geralf's Messenger, while normally is the correct play, if you have Victim of Night in your hand, not positive when your turn opponent goes turn 2 Fencing Ace. If you have Victim, you may just want to hold on to Victim of Night until you can play something a little more powerful. Either way, sideboards, we have, for the sideboards, Frank Skarren's deck has a couple more options here. He has 3 Strangleroot Geists in his deck, which probably come in as a better card than Fencing Ace. Just because he needs to have 2 different... Yeah, it could be just because he needs to have 2 kill spells to deal with it. I think Frank really wants to minimize the number of cards that can get 1-for-1 by Tyler. Outside of that, a lot of his cards, he has Ray of Revelation, he has Fog in his deck, lots of cards that really aren't for this matchup.
Yeah. So, if you're just joining us, you are just in time to catch Game 2 of Round 3 of the StarCityGames.com Standard Open Series live from Philadelphia. I'm Joey Pasco in the booth with Matthias Hunt, and we've already seen, well, we're getting a tour of the standard format. We've seen a couple different decks. In just 2 rounds of coverage. Here you see Bant Hexproof in the hands of Frank Skarren, who is up a game against Tyler Vogt and the Rock deck. We also saw Brad Nelson playing a Big Blitz deck, which he won his round 2 feature match, and Drew Levin playing Blue-White-Red. Blue-White-Red Flash, Blue-White-Red Control. So yeah, we're getting quite a mix of decks.
Yeah.
Thanks to our coverage lead, Glenn Jones, picking out some good ones for us.
So otherwise the sideboard, looking at Tyler Vogt's options, he just needs to have more ways, make sure that all his cards can interact with Bant Hexproof, which is one of those easier said than done things. Because Bant Hexproof is really the kind of deck that is trying to not let you interact. He does have a couple of cards that he's brought in for this purpose. He has an extra Golgari Charm in his board, which is almost certain to come in the matchup. Outside of that, there aren't too many cards that he really can use. He has a Gaze of Granite,
yeah.
Which at 5 mana does deal with an Invisible Stalker. It's not really ideal, but it's the kind of matchup where you probably board in. At 4 mana, it knocks off all the Ethereal Armors, and it's funny because when you say these things, they sound so bad.
Right, but
you wouldn't want to make
it's better than nothing.
There's so many cards in your deck that probably don't do anything.
Right.
That you end up making that play anyway.
The 4 main deck Mutilates should do some work. We just didn't see any there.
Yeah, I mean, that's one of the strengths is that the rock deck here, this black-green deck, really is good against all forms of creature decks. And I have to actually think that this is a matchup that Tyler's not that scared to see. He has more cards to interact with ban hexproof than a lot of decks in the format.
Right. So, we're going to see Tyler leads off with a Swamp on the play here. Breeding Pool from Frank. And a turn 1, Avacyn's Pilgrim from Frank. Tyler has a turn 2 Sign in Blood for the second game in a row.
Yeah, so Avacyn's Pilgrim is probably the only creature in ban hexproof that Frank doesn't normally suit up. The reason he played is that the ban hexproof deck is a little bit slower than a lot of the decks in the than the late aggro decks in the format. Avacyn's Pilgrim really helps make up for that.
Also, it's a nice out to some of the answers that people do have for hexproof creatures, like Devour Flesh, Sacrifice Effects. And you're just like, okay, I don't care about my Pilgrim. Voice of Resurgence comes down for Frank Skarren, and Tyler, for his turn 3, is going to
Duress and Miss. Frank has 3 lands, another Voice, and a Invisible Stalker. So it really seems that Frank has decided to keep his hand on the strength of double Voice of Resurgence.
Yeah.
Pretty powerful against Tyler's removal spell deck. Tyler's going to have to then main phase all his kill spells.
So Tyler now with just a Swamp untapped passes back to Frank. Didn't quite see what he drew.
Yeah, fortunately for Frank here, for Tyler, I believe he does have the Mutilate next turn, which will take care of both Voice of Resurgences. And I don't think Frank can not run out the second Voice. 3 damage really isn't enough.
So there he's going to get in for 3, knock Tyler to 14, and play a second Voice of Resurgence, and a Hinterland Harbor. Passes back to Tyler, who draws Abrupt Decay. And here we see
pull the
4
trigger
mana,
on
and
a
there's
Mutilate.
a Mutilate.
So Frank gets 2 stars. There will be 2/2s this turn. So Tyler does need the second kill spell here.
Yeah, there you see Mutilate. That's an all-star from way back in Torment, where it was originally printed, but that's an M13 version.
Yeah, Mutilate particularly good in this matchup because Mutilate doesn't target.
Right.
One of the problems that a lot of these Thragtusk decks have with ban hexproof is they have very few ways to interact with it. Black-green doesn't have that problem. It gets a full 4 Mutilates, which are really just board sweepers.
So Frank adds an Invisible Stalker to the board, pumping both of his elementals, or at least changing their power and toughness to 3/3, so swings in for 6. And
we see second Mutilate, and there we go.
Mutilate number 2, and now he's finally cleared the board.
Right. Frank, as we knew before, we don't know any of the cards left in Frank's hands. Everything that Tyler saw is now on the battlefield.
Yeah.
And
hitting all his land drops.
Pretty good hexproof card by Frank Skarren. Right. And a perfect, right off the top, Tyler draws Liliana of the Veil.
Yeah, she is going to deal with that Geist of Saint Traft. And
an interaction you see so often in a lot of different formats. Liliana as the perfect answer to Geist of Saint Traft.
These are cross-format all-stars here on the table right now. Well, Geist was on the table.
Yeah, so Frank, with a lot of non-targeted removal, or Tyler, a lot of non-targeted removal, really has pulled ahead here.
Now he's going to go ahead and +1 the Liliana. Discards an Abrupt Decay.
Yeah, and from Frank's side, you'd be pretty disheartened to see your opponent discard an Abrupt Decay.
Yeah.
You know, that's a card it's one of those cards that's actually pretty live against you.
Yeah.
Interesting enough, Tyler,
second Abrupt Decay.
What I don't like about that, I'm curious about that play, is that Tyler immediately played the land and then discarded an Abrupt Decay.
Yeah.
I think I would have wanted to discard the land and then gotten to keep all my spells. But because Liliana's at 3 again, he's going to get an answer.
Second copy of Geist of Saint Traft for Frank, immediately dealt with by Liliana, and a Desecration Demon from Tyler.
Well, Liliana's just so good here. You know, that play, when you see Frank make it, you're saying, oh, well, why would he play a Geist of Saint Traft into a Liliana? Because that seems so bad.
To -2 to Liliana.
Right, the problem is that if Liliana's kind of puts you in a, bad if you play it, bad if you don't situation. Because if he keeps it in his hand, it's going to get discarded to Liliana.
And it's going to +1 Liliana.
And it's going to +1, so at least this one gets 2 loyalty counters.
Exactly.
But Liliana on empty board is, when you're a control deck, when you're especially when you're a removal spell deck, is one of those cards that really can shut down the game.
So Desecration Demon gets in for 6, and then a Disciple of Bolas, we'll put that up on the screen for you guys, comes down from Tyler, and when it enters the battlefield, sacrifice another creature. You gain X and draw X, where X is that creature's power. So he gets to gain 6, draw 6. It was like a little Sphinx's Revelation that left a 2/1 on the board. Sounds like Snapcaster.
I think Disciple of Wolves as a 2-of is one of the more exciting cards in Tyler's deck. It is a black Sphinx's Revelation is really a good comparison for it.
Yeah, and of course Tyler has a follow-up in the form of another Desecration Demon, and Frank's gonna scoop him up here, facing down. Just quite the assault over there. Planeswalker and Demon, and Disciple of Bolas gonna just that one shot of drawing cards was plenty, but 2/1 does some damage too sometimes.
Yeah. So going into game 3, so we're in round 3 right now. The Standard Open. Frank Skarren, interestingly enough, is one of those players who really has made a name for himself in Limited.
Yeah.
He won up until today what was the largest Limited Grand Prix ever. He was the victor at Grand Prix Charlotte, which was a 2,700-man event.
We were both there doing the coverage for that. That was an
And
exciting.
that was an impressive performance by Frank. I remember especially in the
was.
top 8. I believe he made it through his top 8 deck. I would say the clear favorite in the top 8, and he ended up kind of steamrolling his way through it. And since then, we saw him and Joe Demestrio. I believe him, Demestrio, and Alec Anezin making the finals of the Team Grand Prix. Or the team sealed open that we had in Somerset.
Yeah.
So both of those, he did finally break onto the constructed scene just 3 weeks ago. He with Shardless Bug, but Standard has been a tougher nut to crack here. For him.
Yeah, so we'll see. We'll see if he can follow up his legacy performance from a few weeks ago with a Standard performance. He is 2-0 at this point with Bant Hexproof, and.
But I'd say one of the hallmarks of players when you really get into a constructed format, I would say it's easy enough to win your good matchups, but a real test is whether you can navigate your tough matchups, which I think this is one of them for Frank.
Yeah. He's facing up against a deck that has, like you said, more answers to Bant Hexproof than most decks in the format. The Rock is a deck that, if I'm saying, all right, I'm going to bring Bant Hexproof to this tournament, the Rock deck is a problem, but I expect to not run into it.
Right, the Rock...
It shows up, but I mean, I don't expect to run into it like I'm going to run into Naya or Junk, things like that.
So what you have said, interestingly, I'm wondering with the last hand, the last method of attack he kind of chose there, he kept a hand which was really trying to double Voice of Resurgence's opponent. I'm not positive that in this matchup that plan is going to work very often, just because of the sheer amount of removal Tyler has. The Voice of Resurgences will make Tyler work really hard, but I think in the end, Tyler's deck should be able. Frank has to know that Tyler's deck will be able to answer both of those. 2 voices won't take his whole life total.
Right. It was, you think of Voice of Resurgence as a 2-for-1, but Mutilate kind of does the same thing. And 2 voices traded with 2 Mutilates, but the Mutilate also got an Invisible Stalker off the board as well.
Right.
So,
well, he put the Invisible Stalker down because he needed to make those stars.
He wanted it big, right?
I think really what will help him in this matchup is growing 1 threat really big. It'll get it out of Mutilate range. If he gets a Geist Saint Draft, and then on the play, at least Spectraflight Ethereal Armor,
right?
Something like that on it. I think that'll be. That's probably his preferred game plan in this matchup.
And that's where we'll see Gaze of Granite shine.
Gaze of Granite would be excellent against those kind of hands.
Just a one of them. We don't know if Tyler brought it in, but it is something. So it looks like we're evaluating our openers. Tyler appears to have kept.
Yeah, well, Frank's on the play this
right,
game.
So
he'll get to make
the
the call first.
Yeah. Oh no, Tyler didn't.
Tyler's not
okay,
keeping.
Sorry. When he put his hand down, I assumed, but.
Well, sometimes what players do, and actually, what I'll try to do when I play is not look at my hand until my opponent, if I'm going second, until my opponent's made a decision. I kind of think of myself as one of those players who, as try as I might, you can probably see in my body language how much I like my hand.
Right.
That's a pretty hard skill to work out.
Yeah.
Like whether or not whether it's one you have to think about. And once I look at those cards, I'm going to start thinking about whether if it's a close one, I'll start going into the tank about it. My opponent will probably know that it's a close one, and I just assume not let them know anything about my hand when they're making their decision. So because of that, Tyler may be of that school as well. Keep your hand on the table until your opponent makes a call.
Yeah, and I think that's probably something that I should be doing as well, because I definitely will make faces at bad hands. Like, stop it! Shouldn't be doing that. So yeah, but it looks like Tyler's actually going to 5 here. I think he quickly looked at his 6 and decided to throw it back. So,
Well,
yeah, I don't
that's
know.
rough. The good news is that in this matchup, it's not, a mulligan to 5 is not a death sentence. Because when you make good plays against banned hexproof, your good plays are often 2-for-1s or 3-for-1s. If you kill that, if Frank makes a creature and puts a bunch of auras on it and you kill it, you're probably getting a 3-for-1 out of him.
So you're gaining those
You're
cards
gaining
back.
all those cards back. Granted, you still have to hope that your 5 is keepable.
Right, and that you have an answer for that.
That you have an answer. There's you're asking a lot of your 5-card hand, but that's usually true anytime you're mulliganing to 5. You're just asking that hand to have a plan.
All right, so we're gonna see, does Tyler's hand have a plan?
Well, let's see.
Looks like he kept. So
I believe he does have that Gaze of Granite you're mentioning there.
Okay. I think he actually may have had 2 or 3 lands in that hand. So
which is pretty good.
Yeah. Avacyn's Pilgrim from Frank passes back. Tyler has Voice of Resurgence from Frank.
Right, so this hand very similar to the one that Frank kept last time. That's Avacyn's Pilgrim into Voice of Resurgence.
Right.
No auras. We'll see. Maybe some of the auras come down next turn.
And a Tragic Slip for the Pilgrim. Main phase from Tyler.
Yep, he's going to main phase it due to Voice of Resurgence.
Exactly. Doesn't want to deal with one creature only to populate another one on the board.
Right.
And a Ranker on the Voice of Resurgence from Frank Skarren, and it looks like...
I think a second Ranker.
A second Ranker. So Voice is going to get in for 6 here.
And Frank's going to hit Tyler while, hit him while he's down a little bit there, especially while Kill Spell mana isn't up. Granted, he doesn't really want to lose those Rankers. It's pretty hard for Tyler here because even if he kills the Voice of Resurgence, he's going to take 5 more off the hit next turn, as Frank will then just be able to double Ranker.
Right. So Geralf's Messenger comes down for Tyler.
Yeah. Things are a lot rougher now.
Yeah. And not able to answer the Voice, and we're going to see Voice swinging for 6 alongside a Strangleroot Geist from Frank Skarren, and it's looking rough for Tyler.
Strangleroot Geist is a card we pretty much see come in against any black deck because you saw that Tyler there drew Liliana of the Veil. It's so good at answering cards like that. Liliana really doesn't have an effect on the board anymore.
Right. Yeah, Liliana will actually improve the Strangleroot Geist were he to play it here. So Tyler trying to think about what he can do. We know he has the Liliana. He kept a 5-card hand, so it's like you said, a lot to ask of 5 cards. He's got a reasonable start, but I think he's really in trouble here. And he's gonna go ahead and play that Liliana and
sacrifice. I mean, Frank. You have to assume that Frank's gonna pick the Strangleroot Geist.
Yeah. So go ahead, Strangleroot Geist. We have a Tragic Slip.
I actually think he's counting damage on.
Yeah, that's it.
Counting damage. He makes it. Had him, you want to make sure that Frank chose the right creature. You can't imagine Frank didn't. So 2 games to 1, Frank does manage to defeat Tyler Vogt.
Yeah, with some help from Tyler's apparently opening 7 and then opening 6.
Right.